Welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you're here. I know you're going to be so glad that you're here because I've got a great guest who is soon to become my best friend, I think, because
Oh,
we're kindred spirits in a whole lot of ways.
yeah.
And she's got stories to tell. You're going to learn a lot. She is the mother of four, grandmother of five, plus
Mhm.
some grand dogs thrown in there.
Yeah.
And she's a writer, she's a speaker, she does a lot of things. And so you're going to love her as much as I do. So, Ann, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for coming. One thing that we're going to talk about is the fact that you're the mother of missionaries,
I
which
am.
might sound glorious and wonderful and so proud, but there's some
Right.
catches to it. So, we're going to talk about that. But I want to start with you. I want people to get to know you. So, I would like to hear about 8-year-old Ann.
8-year-old Anne. Oh my goodness. I love to write. Even when I was 8, I had that in my heart, and I would fill notebooks with writing and drawing, and of course, dreamed one day of being a mom and having a house full of children and grandchildren. So that would be me. I
Yeah.
haven't changed a lot from those original dreams.
Yeah, well, that's kind of cool because sometimes kids have dreams that never are fulfilled. And
Right.
I've heard that if you think about the things that you really love to do as a kid, that
Hmm.
probably that's what you should be doing as an adult. There's a
Right.
reason you loved them as a kid. So really
Right.
cool that you were writing then and you're still writing and
Right.
doing the things that you
Hmm.
dreamed of doing then, you're doing now. So
I've
you met
tried.
the man of your dreams.
I did. We met in college at my very first Bible study meeting with InterVarsity. I knew enough that when I went to college to get plugged in a Bible study, and then I met my husband there, and we dated 4 years and went on to raise our family. He went to med school and residency, so we were married about 10 years before he got a really good paying job. So it was rough, but those are very sweet times. We had two kiddos in there at that time and moved forward. We always would find a church that taught scripture, that was very biblically founded. We raised our children in a church that loves missions and missionaries, and Awana's focus on missionaries, which I just loved. But then when they decided to leave and be full-time missionaries, I was just like, no, I was talking about everybody else's kids, not mine.
Right.
How you feel.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
they took it all to heart, and I have no doubt that each of them were led by God as they set out. That was their passion to share.
Yeah, well, I think you have to be because
Yeah,
it's not like it's some glamorous
right,
thing.
right,
Like when missionaries go and visit a church and they tell their stories and whatever, I can see where a kid would look
mhm,
at that and go, "Oh man, that's so cool." But
right,
there's reality there. I mean, it's hard to pick up
right,
from your life. I mean, really, you're changing life completely to go into an entirely different culture where you
right,
may or may not be accepted,
right.
where and bring your kids into that and figure it all out and who knows what's going on with what country. So yeah,
Right.
no, it is a big sacrifice. It is a big life sacrifice. In fact, I have a
Mhm,
friend who is married to a woman who was a
mhm,
missionary,
mhm,
and her and her husband divorced,
mhm.
um, and which is apparently not uncommon. Like it
Right.
can
It's a
be
tough
awfully hard
life. It's a
marriage.
very difficult life. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. So it's not all a bed of roses, but look at the work
mhm.
that people do. It's incredible. So
It's
praise
true.
the Lord. There's people that want to do it. It's just
There is,
amazing.
and that is my heart of my book is to encourage parents of missionaries to then encourage their kids. They need that, and so many missionaries I meet will say their parents aren't supportive, and so that's important. And to encourage missionaries, and then we'll get to talking about the grandkids, which is another whole bag of information. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and it just is not an easy life. And it is one that I could see where, first of all, here you're thrown into it
Right.
as mom and grandma, right? Like all of a sudden
Right.
they're gonna
Right.
take off and leave. I don't know about you, but I think when my kids were 4, I made them sign a paper that they wouldn't move more than 2 miles away. They haven't all adhered to that, but they
How
are,
about that? Oh
yeah,
yeah, I should
yeah, right,
have.
right, exactly.
Right,
But
right,
they do, they grow up and move away and you don't control it, whatever.
right, right.
But you couldn't find anything out there, how to be a mom of a missionary. They go, where's that book? I mean, until
Right.
you wrote it, nothing existed.
Right. I did eventually find a few. There's more being written, and I've put them, they're in the back of the book too, under my resources. But I was searching. The day I left them at the airport was so emotional. I would say we didn't have a healthy departure, and I wrote in the book about how to change that for the future. But our departure, I would say that was the proudest and saddest day of my life because I'm so proud that they're taking this huge step. And then I was just crushed. These were my only grandkids. And at that time, they were 4, 2, and a newborn. And they were taken off with no return plans, moving, sold everything, and then just took off. And they went, it's a third world country. And that means not necessarily plumbing. And, a lot of their neighbors had dirt floors and thatched roofs and everything. They would tend to live in a cinder block house, but without a real toilet. So, it was dire, but they had so much passion for the people they wanted to share with. And so,
Yeah, yeah,
um,
and obviously a
yeah,
huge heart to serve.
it,
And
they were.
yeah, and I think it is a calling. I
Mhm.
think again, it can sound glamorous, but holy cow, then there's
Right,
real life. How do you cook
right.
over
Oh,
open
yeah,
flame? No oven, no stove,
right.
right?
It
Where
was it was
food,
difficult. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
all the stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. So once they left, I came home. On the way home from the airport, I just pulled over and bawled. And I said, I was surprised at my overwhelming grief. I was a strong believer. I was leading in women's ministry and taught Bible study. And I would say, oh, yes, I have faith in God. I believe. But then when it's your kids and your grandbabies leaving, I was just really hurting. And I didn't know who to turn to because so many of our friends had supported them, given money for them to go. And I felt like, how can I go to the doorstep and say, I am just broken over this? And so I was trying to hide it. And I have a term I call pass the fig leaf. It's like, okay, let me just put on this outer exterior that everything's fine. And they ask how the kids are. Fine, fine, everything's fine. But I grew from grief into really being angry with God because the life I imagined was full of my kids close, my grandkids nearby, going to the birthdays and the recitals, and that had all been taken away. And so I just, yeah, a bit of a pity party, but then, God can outweigh you when you give him the silent treatment. He always wins. And he just really began whispering to me and reminding me some things in scripture about a mother's heart. And he's just saying, I created mothers. I gave them those hormones. I gave them those emotions. And he goes, that's part of what I created you to do. And I was remembered about Mary, and I was reading in Luke, and at the time she knew that Jesus was very special because of the visitation to herself and Joseph. But then these shepherds show up at the manger saying, whole sky was filled with angels. They told us to come here to see him. And the scripture says, and Mary treasured these things in her heart. And so when he's 12, again, the same term, when she sees him in the temple speaking to the rabbis, they're all astounded. And it says, she treasured these things in her heart. And isn't that what a mother does? We love our children, and we treasure the times when they're tiny and all the things we taught together. But then I was reminded on the day Jesus was circumcised, Simeon said he will be, prophesied of the wonderful things Christ would do and bring freedom for people. But then he looks at Mary and said, but a sword will pierce your heart. And it's like, it's this duality of God giving us these precious children and we nurture them and bring them up, but we got to do it with open hands. And that's how I was really how he spoke to me, but not harshly. He was so sweet to just remind me of these things that he knew what was ahead. He couldn't change the path Jesus was on. He couldn't change the fact that he would be dying on the cross. But yet, and then you go back in the Old Testament, you look at Moses's mother giving him up, Hannah, and you look at Daniel's mother, all these kiddos. So
Yeah.
that's how it spoke to me, ministered to me, and I realized I had to surrender. Had to surrender.
Wow. Wow. I would think it would take a minute to come to that because
Oh
it is so hard. It's so hard when you're with them and then they're gone and
yes,
not just down the road or not just one state over.
right,
They're
right.
gone, not easy to reach. You're
Yes.
not going to just pop
So
in for the weekend
very
and they're not coming home for the weekend, you
true.
know, the holidays, all that stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's so mother to grieve like that, to feel like that, like, oh my gosh, there they go. Like,
I
now what
know.
and when? And those little babies, like
Right.
that would be so hard. And yeah, I don't know. I do remember when my kids were younger, I have 5 kids,
Oh wow.
11 grandkids. Yeah, I got a
Oh,
whole
beautiful.
castle of people. Yeah.
Good.
But I remember when they were younger thinking, they're never going to move out. I don't want them to ever move out. Like when they're little,
Right.
we can't even imagine them being in a position where they're maybe capable, but wanting to be that far away. Like I didn't want them that far away. But
Right.
then when college age came, I was like, good for you.
Yeah.
I'll cry for a minute, but good for you, go after it.
Yeah.
But it's an entirely different thing when they're going across water. They're going to some entirely different place. So yeah, how long of a transition was that for you to come from bawling to okay?
It was, I would say, a good 18 months because it just took time in the Word, prayer, and I feel like it was like being grapes crushed. But then comes the new wine and joy from ashes. God just has a way of redeeming these very difficult things in our life and bringing purpose out of it. And so then I became very passionate about I want to encourage my kids and I want to work hard to be in the life of my grandchildren, whether it's frequent Zoom meetings, or whatever.
Mm,
So, yeah, a good
yeah.
18 months.
Wow. Wow. Well, and praise the Lord for Zoom, right? That you
Mhm,
can
mhm.
see each other and
Right,
talk and stay connected that way because
right.
man, that is I could I mean 18 months I think I would probably take 7 years. So 18 months I commend you. That's really good.
Right.
Yeah. So what were some of the biggest your biggest worries or struggles?
Oh, numerous. And I kind of learned, okay, I worry about it, but then it's like, I can't go there. I can't go there. And I felt like one of the things I had to surrender was that worrying all the time and just say, no, God, I'm going to focus on you. But they lived in an area where there weren't high level hospitals. If the kids got sick, one of them did get dengue fever, but it was mild. But if there was a car accident or something, what would happen? Well, people just die in there. I will have to say that at the airport, and I was driving with my daughter the first time they left, and there were 3 car seats because they were 4 and under and they were in the back and we got there and my daughter waited till she was getting out of the car and she says, Mom, you can take those, you can store them or sell them. I go, oh, that is so kind. So somebody's going to meet with car seats. She goes, no, they don't have car seats there. And then she said they don't have seat belts. So she's taking off and that was something. So if you want an example of what I worried about was like, we're so taught keep those kids safe, put them in the car seat. Illness, trafficking. Of course, I was worried my kids would be kidnapped, or something similar to that. I think it was about the time Liam Neeson's movie Taken came out, and
Oh
so
geez,
this is
great
great.
timing.
Thank you, thank you. So, but illness, yes, their marriage, I wanted it to stay strong. It was a very stressful time. Yeah, things like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting,
Hmm.
because it's true.
Yep.
In a lot of countries, healthcare is primitive,
Right.
and scarce
Right.
quite often.
And that is why they went, because he was a family physician, she's a PA. And so they went there with the heart. They met in college and they had the same desire to go somewhere to provide medicine where there was none or very little, and to also share the gospel where there's no gospel presentation. And that's what they found there. And so through providing medical care, and then can I share a story with you? It's a story
Oh,
driven
please.
society.
Yeah,
That was their ministry to, once they learned the languages,
yeah.
they would,
That's what
that
they
was
would do.
their model of what they were doing, just offering it to people around. And then, you know, what we did not expect was COVID.
Oh, yeah. So what year did they leave?
It's been 10 years. I've been trying to count this up and I don't know the exact year, but it's been 10 now. So that 4-year old is 14 now. And they were in the original country they were in. So COVID happened and everything shut down. You think it is bad here in California or something? It was really bad there. And it was thought that all the foreigners brought it in. So they were foreigners and they got locked in for weeks. And, you know, in the beginning, people were just dying. And it was that case there. But my son in law trained at just an excellent residency program that treats really serious things. So he was at the hospital and he was leading the team on the COVID work. But that was a difficult time. And then on the heels of that, soon after, was a military coup. So this nation then they wake up one morning and there's no internet and the electricity is going on and off, and then they learned that it had been shut down because the military took the elected officials, imprisoned them, and the whole country was on under military whatever. They're up in the mountains and they're far away from the military, so they were able to wait a number of years as the fighting encroached, you know, upon their town. But oh my goodness, they were determined, and they loved the people, and that many people had come to faith and were in a home church with them, and they were just like, we don't want to leave them, these are our people, you know. And so they waited and they tried. The doctors disappeared from the area, so for a while there my daughter was delivering all the babies for about 3 hours everywhere. They had a very fruitful ministry there. So yeah, but when you think about the initial, your kids leaving, you got to get ready for that and you prepare your heart. And then there was COVID. And then there's a coup. And every time what you learned about surrendering your fears to God, they get retested. They just were retested. And yeah,
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, COVID was scary to a certain extent, at least, no matter
right,
where you were. And nobody, like when we were first locked down, I was like, this will be a week, this will be
right,
2 weeks. And then,
right. 2 weeks.
a year later, here we are. And
Right.
so I'm sure they were thinking the same, like, how long is this going to last and where is it going to lead? And, there's so much uncertainty, and
Mhm.
you don't want them to get COVID. And
Yes. And
yeah,
they stayed. They chose to stay because they were all healthy and all this. And so they thought too, maybe a month. But once they stayed, then they couldn't get back to the United States. They couldn't leave. Nobody wanted them to come into their airports and everything. So they were there for the long haul.
wow, wow.
Yeah.
So where did the kids go to school, by the way? Or where did they go?
Okay, the kiddos, this is another thing I just love about them is they are fearless about having their kids really get to know the kids in the neighborhood and everything. They sent them to first off, a little Christian church-led kindergarten so they could learn the language there. And then as the kids got older, they would go to a local school because they wanted them to develop relationships with the kids there. And this was not Christian. This was they were in Asia, Southeast Asia. So it was a Buddhist school, you know, which was challenging, but my kids weren't fearful of that. They're like, no, we know what we believe. We're not going to be afraid. So during this time, they would play with the kids in the neighborhood. I got tickled. I have this picture I love that one day the rice fields were there. And so my daughter asked some of them, could we come help you plant rice? Because we just see you do this. It looks so fun. And that was a hilarious day. They weren't very effective, but the Nationals loved it and thought that was very funny. So lots of relationships. It's very much a visiting relation. You go to people's homes and they're not going to listen to your stories until you've been to their home a few times and they've dropped in on you and you've entertained them some. You just don't rush into, the spiritual stuff. You wait, you build relationships, you have stories. The granddaughters, when they were probably 12 and 10, they started having a girls' Bible study in their home. And my daughter would come from the clinic and she would share the initial story, and then they would share the tea and the cookies that they had prepared for them and lead a discussion. And so this is well into the coup. And so all of a sudden the girls started disappearing, and my daughter would go ask the mother and they said, well, oh yes, she went to work. Well, when you send a 9 or a 12-year-old to work somewhere, that means traffic. They're being trafficked for all sorts of things, as we can well imagine. So that was very hard for my granddaughters to be aware of. And so there was one girl that she'd come to faith out of Buddhism, and so she had been baptized with her parents' blessing, and she said, I don't want to be trafficked. I don't want to be sold. She said, can I go live with them under their family? Because parents, in order to make a living, they had to leave the country. And they said, fine, if they agree, you can have them. So she is now my fifth. My adopted granddaughter is not official legal as much as they can, but she has been taken into their home under their wing. And I met her for the first time this last year. It's really neat. But
Oh, wow.
I think if all the girls had asked them to take them, I think they would have had 5 new daughters,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
rescue them
Open their
from
home. Yeah.
the traffic.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because in some developing nations, third world, whatever you want to call places where there's going to be extreme poverty. And
Yes, yes,
yeah, and so there can be situations often where the parents kind of think they're doing their kid a favor.
that's right.
They can't afford to feed them necessarily.
Right,
Somebody's offering them some money and promises are made. A lot of times it's,
right.
oh yeah, no, if they're going to do work around the house, but they'll go to school and they'll eat
Mhm.
good. And then that's not always what happens.
Right, right,
So
exactly.
yeah, so the parents
Yeah.
can have the best intentions,
Hmm.
thinking they're giving their kid an opportunity
Right,
for education, for whatever, and then
right.
yeah, not so good. Yeah, you really don't want to
You
sell
know, you got it exactly, and that's it. And I know the parents care for them, and they think they don't have any way to feed them.
your right, right, right. There's only so much food to go around.
Excuse
Yeah,
me. And so, right, exactly. And then there's younger kids. So, what are you going to do? You're going to save the littler kids by having this one go work somewhere and they'll send money back. So,
right.
so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So a tough situation,
it is.
tough situation.
It
And,
is.
they lose contact, so they don't really know what's going on. I mean, just all this stuff. So yeah, so how cool. You have a fifth granddaughter. That is so
Mhm,
awesome. Yeah, yeah, that
mhm,
is really
we
cool.
do.
Yeah, good for them.
Right,
So, so the grandkids are being raised completely differently or a completely different culture than
right.
their parents were raised in.
And I would say their first language, not the oldest one, but the next three, their first language was not English because they were so embedded over there with school, with people who would drop into their home. It became easier just to speak in this other language. And so they would come home on furlough, and it was really kind of comical, but they wouldn't really understand what we were saying. We had to kind of flip back and forth. Yes,
Yeah.
they were. Now, I will add to this, as the children got older, elementary and all, they began to homeschool them in addition. So those kiddos went to two schools and they did homeschool because they were always aware we don't know the future. If we were sent back to the States, we wanted each of the kids to be ready to go into school there, to be
Mhm.
prepared and trained. So they all love learning, so it wasn't really a problem at all.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, good for them. Yeah, I was wondering that, like,
Mhm.
because the schools are different in every country,
They
and
are.
expectations are different. What's taught can be different. And so, yeah, so what do you do to make sure
Right.
that, yes, they're going to this local school, but they also need
Mhm.
other things?
Well, and school there is not mandatory and it's not promised. So you have generations of kids who've never been to school. And so this was much the case of the young girl that was adopted. And so, um, yeah, so just kind of catching her up with school and everything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and often too, in places like that, they wear a uniform
Yes, they do wear
that you
uniforms.
have to pay for. So
Yes,
it might be free. The schooling might be free,
but they
but then
can't.
you pay for a uniform. Do you have money for a uniform? Do you have money for the right shoes? Do you have money for the books and the
Right,
supplies and everything else? And so, it might sound like this grand opportunity and everybody's welcome, but everybody's not welcome because
right.
they don't have what they need to even attend.
My oldest granddaughter, and she's very close to the one that's a little bit older that we've adopted. They're very tight. And she goes, I want to help her write a story of her life. And I go, oh, I wish you would. I said, the world needs to understand what kiddos around the world are going through,
Mm.
and have an outcry. We've got to change things, but it's not all rosy. I said, I think it would be a beautiful story to be shared with the world.
Yeah, I'd buy that book. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
hope she
know.
does write it. Yeah, that would be really
Right.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people are people all over, right? Like
Mm.
we all have the same basic needs. We need
Right.
clean water that's not
Mhm.
available everywhere. We need decent shelter, we need
Right.
clothes, we need
Right.
food, to survive, just
Mhm.
basics. But so people are people when you get down to the core of everybody, but
Mhm.
life's experiences
Right.
mold you.
Right. They do. I would say the first missionary trip I ever went on was visiting my daughter and her family in this country. And of course, during school, I always wanted each of my kids to go on a mission trip during high school so that they would understand that you're really wealthy compared to the rest of the world. I wanted them to see a third culture country, but I sent them, I never went. And so this was my first trip. And I flew in with a missions pastor from their church. So, I was under his wing and we get out of the airport and I'm literally looking beside the road and I say, please tell me that people are not living in those boxes. He goes, they're living in the boxes. They are. As we drove up into the mountains to their house, and they would tend to have cinder block houses that were very open, at the top. But, across the street, it's nothing to have a dirt floor and grass sides and a roof and everything. So it was very eye opening to me. It's very good for me, but it was
Yeah,
eye opening.
yeah. Well, I
Mhm.
think you learn how little you can live with, right?
Yes,
That
yes,
the material things that
right,
you can get by pretty
right,
easily without. Yeah.
right. My son-in-law, who I admire greatly as the leader of this home, he's very wise and very grounded spiritually. And he's in the States sometimes, and I'll say something. He goes, that's a first world problem. We don't have that
Right.
problem over there.
Yeah, no, get it.
Yeah, yeah,
The line at Starbucks is way too long, right?
right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. They
he
didn't
helps me
have my
laugh at,
creamer.
yes,
Yeah.
he helps me laugh at myself and get life in perspective.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly. Well,
yeah.
and even food, speaking kind of food, uh,
Hmm.
what you're used to being
Right,
available and what you
uh-huh,
grew up with isn't necessarily what's going to
right,
be available in a new place. So it's
correct.
everything. It's really everything. And there's not like a Walgreens down the road. And there's not,
No,
some of the things that we're just so used to aren't,
right.
which is
But it's open air market. So when
Yeah.
they come home and the kids are in a grocery store, I mean, they're just like looking everywhere with wide eyes and all. Yeah, it's an open air market.
Right,
Exactly.
right. So you go get your stuff fresh and
Yes,
then, yeah,
daily.
so you're not storing a lot of it. You're going to
That's
that open
right.
air market often.
Well, you never know if the electricity is going to turn your refrigerator off. So you definitely don't stock up.
Right, yeah, right,
Things.
exactly. Yeah,
Right.
so interesting. It's an interesting life. It's
Hmm.
it's not even Little House on the Prairie.
No,
It's different than that because it's a whole different culture, a whole different world, and
it
in
is. But
ways.
they did it with such grace and such joy. And I could tell they genuinely love these people so much that they didn't count it as things they were laying down and all. It was just the life God called them to.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's
It
so
is.
cool.
It is.
Yeah. So you found that other moms of missionaries actually
Mhm.
feel the same way you did, actually are going through the same struggles.
Right.
But I've never, you said you found a couple books since
Hmm.
writing
Hmm.
yours, but I've never even heard anyone talk
Right.
about that
Right.
or give support or help. It's always been, oh gosh, your daughter's a missionary. That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was just like, oh, how was this send off? It must have been so wonderful. And I was sitting there with this little smile on my face going, oh, it was something. Yeah. Yeah, it was hard. But yes, and I hope through the book, and I in some places I'll address churches, and it's like how they can better support missionaries. And we've had a wonderful church. They're major sending church, and they were the ones that set up the advocacy teams. And on my daughter's advocacy team, there was someone assigned to me as a liaison, and they would call and check in on me. And I have to say, the worst days of my life, well, besides them leaving, but I will say now, my other kids will say, "You're a news junkie." I said, "No, I'm not a news junkie. It's just that before I get out of bed, I check the headlines because the worst days of my life were when the coup struck their country. And I wake up and my phone's going ping, 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 ping. And people go, "Have you watched the news? Have you looked at the news?" And I go, "Oh, what happened?" So I look, and it was a good week before we heard from them. And your mind can do all sorts of things before you get to talk to them and all. And I knew the church couldn't reach them, and the sending organization couldn't reach them either. So it was nice when people reached out to me. And then the second day was the morning of October 7th, and the other daughter happened to be in Jerusalem that day. And again, your heart just stops, and you're gripped with fear. And again, you got to go back to the things he had taught you those first few years, to lay it down and to trust him. But yes.
Not easy. Not
Mm,
not easy. Yeah,
no.
I remember even 9/11. My
Yes.
kids were all in the country, but
Right.
I was like, "Where are they? I want
Mm,
them near me," like I got my daughter was off to college, and I'm like,
wow.
"Gotta
Right.
get a hold of her, and is she safe?" Because who knew what was gonna happen,
We
on
didn't
that
know.
day. Yeah,
Right. We
yeah,
didn't know what would happen next. And it's that unknown that gets
right,
to us. But
right. But even more so when your kid's in Jerusalem on
yes,
October 7th. Holy
yes.
cow.
Right,
Or,
right,
in some country far,
right,
far away and can't just come home to your bomb shelter, not that you have one, but people used to. I don't know,
right.
but come back under your protection, it almost feels like.
Right. And really, I've been able to travel to Israel several times in the Middle East, and it's a beautiful area. Our family, we love history and architecture and ruins. And so it's a very beautiful place. And my daughter had friends of many faiths in the Middle East. And so our hearts hurt for everybody there. I just wanted to go back to where um, she was involved a lot in tourism. And so she's not there right now. But because there's no tourism, just that didn't work. So, but we have friends. We just would love for it to go back to this beautiful country. And everywhere in the Middle East really became dangerous. In any place in Europe, just when that all came to a head and broke out. So, yeah,
Right, right. And again, fear the unknown, right? Like
right.
what's
No
gonna happen?
surprise. I kept saying, no surprise to God. The coup
Yeah,
was not a surprise to him. 9/11, I mean, not 9/11, October 7th was not a surprise. So, yes.
right. And he didn't leave. He
No,
didn't say, you know what, I'm not really liking this little battle, so I'm out of
right,
here.
right, yeah,
So that's so comforting to
right.
know God is there, constant, always, and
Yeah.
forever, and is on your side and
Uh-huh.
roots for you and wants to take.
And he cares about those moms, the mission mothers of missionaries when their hearts just stop, and he comforts me. He was there. He was available to me, and he helped me. I had some really rough days that I just couldn't even go out for 2 days. So as news got really bad, but I learned to lean into friends, ask for prayer and scriptures, songs, and I'd get back to life again. Hmm.
Wow, yeah, that's
Right.
cool. What about dads of missionaries?
Oh my goodness, that is such, you have such great questions. So I did write the book as a mother, but a dad, okay, right before the first one left with the babies, and when I say we didn't have a good departure, what I would say in the future, I give advice and I said you should sit down with them and you months ahead and you should grieve together. You should be very honest about your emotions and then let each other grieve. They wish they had let us cry with them and everything. We didn't do it. So we're all stuffing our emotions inside and just a few hours before she left, my daughter said, "Why can't dad just be happy for us? Because we get to go do this thing God's called us to do." And I feel like God gave me some wisdom. And I said, "Honey, he couldn't fake it very well." I said, "Honey, a dad when he gets kids, especially a daughter, and he is their protector for life." And I said, "He just doesn't turn that off easily." And I said, "He has fears and concerns and everything, and that's what you're seeing in him." And I just I would like to say this book is hopeful. It's a good book. It's hard and tragic in the beginning, but it's very hopeful because it's a book about overcoming a lot of this. And I will say, 10 years later, my husband and I just returned. And we can talk about that later, but the daughter in the country with the coup, they were finally, the town was overrun and they had to leave quickly and they lost everything in their house. Was bombed and everything. But they're in another country adjacent. And so my husband and I went there to visit, met our new granddaughter, and my husband, oh, he's done a total about face, and he wants to move there. He
Oh, yeah.
loves it, and he loves the people. And he had that little Google Translator out. He was talking to everybody, and he went from that father that wanted to protect him, and they're young. They have three babies, and in our mind, we go, "Did you really hear God about this? Did he really want you to take the newborn?" We were going through all this, but early on, we knew never interfere in their marriage. When he's the husband, we don't get in the way of that. That's a core belief for us. And then I was just determined that I never wanted to dissuade my kids from following the Holy Spirit's leading. And if he's telling them to do that, I may have doubts. I'll give them to God. Sometimes we say tattle to God about it, whatever, deal with that. But then just pray for them and figure out how to come alongside them and be supportive. But yes, dads, I would say the dad feels very protective of the daughter. That doesn't get turned off. And the only answer is, I don't mean to be trite or anything. It is Jesus. They always laugh and say any answer to any question in Sunday school for kids is it's Jesus. But apart from faith, apart from feasting on his word and going back to his promises, and I even had to reach the point at one time, even if the worst thing happened, they shared the gospel, they listened to him, and they did what they were told to do. And I have to just leave that with God. You have to.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, for sure. I can't imagine not
mhm.
having faith
Oh,
and
I
faith.
know.
Yeah,
How would you get through this? But
yeah.
I have to share, I work with Thrive, which is a group that supports women in missions overseas. So I volunteered with them a number of times. We go overseas. pay our way, and then these women in missions come to a spa-like retreat, and then we just bless them. We have worship and singing and all that. And I had a group of young women, and they were saying, I said, I think I should write this book. And they go, oh, please write the book, please. And to a number, they said, my parents are believers. I was raised in the church, and my parents do not support us. And I don't mean financially, I mean emotionally and everything, you know. Um, and that really spoke to me about that. And I said, wow, that is sad, very sad. My daughter said one time when she called, and she could call us and cry about stuff. And she goes, Mom, on my whole team, she goes, everybody else, if they call home to cry, they want to give them a ticket and say, just quit and come home. She goes, you don't ever tell me to quit. I said, well, I don't want to get in the way of what God is leading you to do. And
Mhm.
there's fruit, there is fruit there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and fruit you can't see.
Right. And
Right.
we'll see it in heaven. And those little girls in the Bible study, we still pray for them wherever they've been sent, that they
Yeah.
remember the gospel.
They had to be heartbreaking for them
Mhm.
to have to move from the
Mhm.
community that they fell in love with and were such a part of.
The children remember no place else. That is home. They have been home on furlough a few times, and they're they're just sad. They want more rice and noodles, and they don't like American food, and they just will say they want to go home. And people will say, "Aren't you glad to be home?" And they're like, "No, I'm not home." And one thing I've had to learn is to recognize that is home for them, and to not be manipulative is another thing. And I've learned, parents will say, tell your parents you want to come home, tell your parents you don't want to go back. And I said, no, no, that's wrong. I cannot do that. I have to support what they're doing, even with the grandkids when I'm video chatting with them. So
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine the conflict in a little one's head if
Hmm.
grandma's saying, tell your parents
Yeah.
that you just want to come home.
So
And yeah, and
I
they're going,
just
but I live here and what do I say? Yeah,
right.
that's hard.
Another subject when we talk about the kids is third culture kids, and I don't know if that's a topic you've delved into before. It's an older term. It came up probably in the 1900s, and it refers to a child that lives overseas on a country different than their parents' passport, but they will intend to come back sometime. And they began to do studies. You might have a diplomat, a military family, a business family, but predominantly most of them are missionary kids, MKs, or they're called third culture kids. And the reason is they don't feel at home in America, and they're not fully at home in the new country where they live. And so they're in this in between, the third culture. They don't quite fit in either one. They've found there's wonderful blessings being a TCK. You grow up usually very much where you love the people of the world. You're very kind, meeting people of different, that look different and act different and of different nations. But there's also a lot of trauma that goes along with it. And so one thing I've done is really study up on that because I wanted to understand what my grandkids were going through. And it's one thing we can talk about here is it's important for families that return from overseas during furlough if churches will help them by providing debriefing for them by a professional counselor. And I got to walk through that with my grandkids and my daughter because there were four small kids and they just needed more hands to help sit and do the coloring pages with them. And they used art therapy and games and everything to really get down to the heart of the matter, even with the 4-year-old and everything. So you think about, well, what trauma, do you know how many goodbyes they have to make? They make a friend on furlough and then they keep having to say goodbye, 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 goodbye. And even in their country where they're sent, many missionaries move from country to country and sometimes rapidly because
Oh,
of war.
like your daughter was forced to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
she was. And so there's a lot of grieving that needed to take place. And it needs to be done in a healthy manner where you acknowledge those emotions, and kind of get them out and not stew on them. So,
Wow. Yeah. It's good that support is offered.
mhm.
Hopefully everybody takes whoever up on support, because
Right.
yeah, it's a big transition. I mean, my word, the astronauts go to the moon and come back, and there's a huge debrief, that long,
Right.
huge debrief, and they're gone for however long, I mean,
Yeah.
it's, and of course it's, what was the moon like, whatever,
Yes,
but even so, there is a transition.
there is.
I mean, even if, for moms that are out there, dads that are out there, your kid goes away to college and
Yes.
comes back.
They
They're
have to
not that
come to Mars. They
exactly. They
yeah,
might as well have been on Mars. They come back and they're like, curfew. What is that? Dishes.
exactly.
You're gonna make me do the dishes, and
Yeah,
and by the way, I learned so much. I'm now smarter than you are.
yeah,
Or whatever kids come home with, right?
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
what an extreme transition
Mhm,
from
mhm.
a developing nation to the United
Right,
States. And
right.
yeah, yeah, that's huge.
I love a group. There's a number of them, but it's called TCK Training. So I went on there, and there's a number of videos that you can watch by, or I pay and I get all the parenting ones. Can look at them at any time. Well, I like it because there's some for churches, and they offer workshops for churches where it actually, if you have a lot of missionaries and the kids, they come home on furlough, kind of like how to do furlough well with that missionary family. And this church has been great. Like, they gave them for 2 weeks, they put them in a little retreat place, and they didn't tell the church, anyone in the church, where they were. So nobody's dropping in on them and expecting talking, or, they aren't asked to get up and speak at church for 2 weeks. They get to just rest and regroup as a family,
Mhm.
and get used to things as well. But also, they talk about just things logistically, like for Sunday school teachers or youth group leaders, if you're going to have some of these TCKs in your group, there's just certain things it helps to be aware of. And I just want to tell this one story, which will kind of illustrate it. But I had one daughter, one of the granddaughters, loved gymnastics, and she was going to be in my home for 3 months. So I talked to a local gym place, and I gave them the sob story. I said, they have been in COVID, and then the coup. They were there 3.5 years, and all this stuff. And I said, she really likes gymnastics. I said, is there any way she could take a class with you? And so she did twice a week, and I would go and sit there in the stands, and I would watch and everything. And she's a great kid, good. And I go, something's not right. The instructor just, they aren't clicking. She would get in the car and say, the instructor doesn't like me. So then I started watching, and they'd be all lined up, and she would address different ones. And when she would address my granddaughter would hold her hands like this and have her head down and look at the ground. Well, if you're a public school teacher and you're trying to talk to a kid, most of us in America would be, you're not paying attention to me, you need to look at me, and all this stuff. And she was following the rules of the country she'd come from, and she had been in their schools, and that was the appropriate way to honor your instructor. That's what she was doing, but it was just taken all wrong. And so there have been times in Sunday school, I had a dear friend who texted me, and she goes, I'm sitting outside with your grandson. I could tell it was a little overwhelming in the Sunday school class with 50 kids. And we just went to the park, to the playground, and I asked him to tell me about home. And I went, thank you for
Mhm.
just understanding, that these kids are walking along with the social norms of another country. Um, I also mentor women who serve overseas, and in one group we were talking, and many of them said they'll go home on furlough, and everybody's wanting to talk to them and get their attention at church, and then somebody will say, literally said, your kids are so ill behaved. And it's just like, that crushes me, and I said, when they come home on furlough, they're very tired people, and they're trying to pour out and tell you what's going on. We need to come alongside these people and just maybe delve into the kids, take them aside, go spend time with them, and understand, just things like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. Because culturally, there are so many cultural differences,
Oh, yes.
and what's respect in one country is not respect
Right,
in another.
right.
And I would think even for them to
Mhm.
like your daughter, your granddaughter at gymnastics, she's probably wondering why everybody else isn't bowing their head, you know,
Right,
and standing
right.
that you should.
And she
And
was trying to be really good. So I finally talked to her and I said, you know what? I noticed in America you're supposed to look at the teacher. So I told her that so she would change. And then I went and talked to the instructors and they never got the message that she was from another country. And I went and I talked to them. I said, you know, her first language is not English. It's blah, blah, blah. I don't think you know that. And they go, no. And I just noticed from then on, they kept looking at her, you know, like a little blonde kid.
yeah,
and
yeah, always possible. Yeah.
and she just really didn't understand sometimes the gymnastics terms, and she needed it explained. And they thought she was being sassy, you know. So anyway, there's just a little description, and that might help you understand about Sunday school and youth group and things like that.
Yeah, right. And not to assume that the behavior is
Right,
disrespectful or naughty,
right,
but
right,
instead realize they're from another culture and
right,
what is accepted there or what is expected there.
right.
And, until you know that, don't make judgments, don't judge anyway. But
Yeah,
yeah,
they
yeah,
they're like the wounded, broken people when they come home, and they need us to build them up and
mm,
help them and walk alongside them. So that's another passion of mine.
yeah,
Advocate for TCKs. So,
that's really good.
mhm,
Yeah. So what has it been like for you as grandma with birthdays and holidays and, you know,
right. And I spoke about this in the book how my identity, I had to realize I had to give up an identity. I had to lay that down too. I was mom and nana. And I came around, I got to babysit a lot. I brought books and stuffed animals and toys and all this stuff. And so when they leave, they come to our house before they leave and they get rid of all of it. So all that stuff I'd given them and they leave and I go, how can I love my grandkids? How can I connect? I was loving him by giving him stuff and spending time. And so I have learned to video chat with them. And sometimes it's frequently, but I try to talk to each one for at least 5 minutes or more and just say, what are you learning? Did you make new friends? What was something interesting you saw? Did you learn some new words that were funny or, things like that? I try to talk down on their level. And then for a season, it's a little hard now. They're all different ages, but I would get up at 5 in the morning. I'm not an early person. So that was a real sacrifice. But a first world problem, right? So I would get up and I would do their read alouds for the American homeschooling. They were doing some history books, and all of them would sit there. There were four back then, and they would just sit there and listen to me. And they had a copy, and I had a copy, and I would read because I dearly love reading aloud to kids, and my grandkids. So I got to do that, and that really was a blessing. And then I'd get to tell them good night and everything because my morning is their night, so we have to learn to cooperate with that. Send packages. I can tell you I got to know the post lady here very well during COVID because they went 3 years without coming home or seeing us. And at that time, peanut butter was a big treat, seasoning packets. And there were literally things they couldn't get because they were just a lot taller than the people where they worked, where they served. And so I would send T-shirts and, sometimes warm ups, warm clothes because it got very cold there. And I would have these big packages. I would usually send two at a time. And this lady was so cute. And she'd see me coming, and I think she wanted somebody else to do it because I had these international things to fill out, and neither of us could even read the words. It was just all syllables, and we were trying to figure this out. And I would send them, and then she'd look at me and go, you don't want to send this. This is $180 per box. And I go, yes, I do. I said, this is the only way I have to show love to them. They need this stuff. I said, it's fine. It's the cost of having kids overseas. And she would go, you must love them a lot. It was hilarious. So I got to share, and I just told them what they were doing and all. They were like, wow, but I did that. If a church at that time, church groups could not go over because of the coup and the lockdown and everything. But if they ever go, I like to find out and I'll say, hey, can you save me 2 shoeboxes of room and I'll keep it to a minimum and wait. And then they just will put it in their luggage to take to them. And sometimes I'll say, hey, I'll pay for a whole new duffel. I'll pay the way if y'all will just fill it up with stuff. And,
Yeah.
so I do that. Oh, Kindle books. Because it's a rainforest area, everything dissolves, books dissolve. So each of the kids, when they start reading, they get their own Kindle. And so I'll say, what are you studying in science or history? And I'll just go on Amazon and I'll look for books in their age range on that topic and just drop them into the Kindle. So my gifts
Nice.
have become Kindles, Crocs, because they're indestructible in the rainy season, and peanut butter. So, yeah, and then video chatting. You just have to adapt. But I had
Mhm.
to let go of that preconceived idea of this is what Grandma Nana looks like. Okay, now God, how can I do it differently?
Right. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Because and not every culture showers people with birthday gifts or
True.
presents at Christmas or whatever. So they're
Hmm.
not even expecting something.
True, and the again, I credit my son-in-law who's very wise, and he said, "I want my kids to look like the other kids in the area." He goes, "I don't want them with a lot of stuff because over here we play with a ball and a stick and pebbles and whatever." And he said, "If my kids come in here and they're loaded with all this material stuff, yeah, he didn't want it." Very wise, very
Yeah.
wise.
Yeah. No kidding. Very wise.
Hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my goodness. You go you. I mean, some people go through something and then they use it to help other people. But not
Right.
everybody does that.
Mm.
And that is exactly what you're doing is you're helping other people. And I just think it's so wonderful because you're kind of helping the forgotten people.
Yes. And I was not aware how much you need to do to support missionaries and their moms and their family. It was a whole new world for me. So thank you for letting me talk to people about the book. And you know, um, I have the website and it's available on Amazon. And I just thank you for helping me to get the word out on these things. I'm pretty passionate about them, as you can tell when I
Yeah,
talk.
I love your passion. I love it. And yes, and we'll have everything in the show notes too, so that people can just click and go on and I'll say the book is so good. And if
Mm.
you know missionaries, the book is good for you. If
Right,
you have friends that have kids that are missionaries, send them a copy.
right.
Send a copy to your pastor if you go to church so they have a better understanding of whatever. So don't just buy one, buy a bunch, send them out to people and spread the word. I mean, this is really important stuff. And I just appreciate you so much.
Yeah. It's story driven. My editor says it's a story driven book. She's been great, and I go, it's a quick read, and everybody goes, I cried through the whole thing, and I just went, I think that's good, but yeah, but,
Yeah, yeah, that is good. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and
oh,
all you do. You're incredible.
well, thank
And
you for your
telling
work.
us, yeah, I appreciate it so much.
Okay,
Yeah, and I appreciate everybody else joining us today. And until we see each other again, I just pray that you keep your heart open and live your love loud.